Welcome back to Empathetic Presence. I'm your host, Leigh. And today I have the beautiful pleasure of interviewing another Leigh that I know, Leigh Thompson. Leigh is an organizer, a strategist, an expert facilitator, and someone who helps organizations transform and become stronger, more cohesive cultures while staying true to their core values. I am excited to talk to Leigh because he has over 2 decades of experience helping organizations think about empathetic practice, putting empathy into strategy. Leigh has been at the forefront of equity work before it was even called DEI. For over 25 years, he has been building processes to help us all transform. For myself, as a trans person, Leigh is someone who I have learned from. I imagine we are about the same age, but I might consider him a bit of an elder, someone who's helped me find myself, given me language to know myself better. And I truly believe that that's what they do. I can't wait for you to hear this interview where we talk about how creativity is a critical part for any change, and that in order to create something different, we have to use the power of our imagination. Leigh also talks about how liberation is a place where we all get to be fully human, what that means, and how we have to keep fighting for equity and social change until we are all free. As we continue to witness so much instability and injustice in our society, I find Leigh's words comforting. They have the tools to move us towards more justice and more liberation. Leigh, it's so good to be with you and get to spend some time with you. And I was wondering, would you tell the people listening a bit about how you use your voice?
Absolutely, Leigh. It's actually really great to be here, to get to see you and chat with you today. I do a lot of things. I'm a strategist. I'm an expert facilitator and a professional coach and a consultant doing organizational development, change management, and equity and justice work. I work solo. I work with collaborators, and I really work with organizations and leaders to help them build more strong, cohesive cultures and values-driven work.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about your work so much because I know that you support organizations, you support individuals, you do a lot of theater of the oppressed work, and I think your work is really important right now at a fundamental, foundational level. And can you tell us about, what do you actually do when you're working with an organization or you're partnering with someone, a bit about your process and how the work works?
Absolutely, yeah. I come to my work from a variety of different vantage points. You mentioned that I'm a theater of the oppressed practitioner. I've been doing that work for over 25 years now as a practitioner. It's my chief modality, and it's actually a modality that very few people know about. It really helps individuals and groups develop stronger critical analysis and creative thinking that can help us better understand ourselves, our relationships, and our groups, and as well as interpret the world and create more strategic action that is rooted in equitable and liberatory practice. It's embodied, it's very somatic in practice. And actually, and this is probably the reason why I like it so much, it's a lot of fun. It can get just as silly as it can get incredibly, incredibly deep. And it helps groups come to problem solving in ways that they never thought was possible, which can help shortcut around some of the challenging conversations, barriers to dialogue, or particular topics that have been hard to have conversations about in the past. The press can help us get to it really quickly and in fun and creative ways. And so that's a modality that I use a lot in my facilitation practice, but as a practitioner, it's helped me really develop my critical analysis and help me really understand groups really well. And so depending on the engagement, really my first step when I'm working with an individual or a group of individuals or a larger scale organization is to listen about what people think that they need, what pieces of information folks have about what they feel is going well and what they feel they could be growing at, or might be a challenge, or might be just straight up they feel is going wrong, and help them describe that, but also help to listen to not only what's said, but what's not being said. and through my many years of experience, try to craft a plan that is strategic, that meets them where they're at, that actually leans into their skills, their talents, and the culture of the organization has and what they're trying to build, while also meeting the challenges that they have presently and the growth that's available at the moment.
Oh, I love that it's this listening practice. And I love that you said that Theater of the Oppressed is your chief modality. And when I first learned about Theater of the Oppressed, I think it was in 2006. I was at the Lincoln Center Directors Lab, and it really ruined theater for me. Because I was like, oh, I don't really want to be in a proscenium stage reading a playwright's words when theater can be this meaningful and can challenge oppression and can really be serving people in their real lives, in their real relationships and problems. And I've read that your work is at the intersection of art and social justice and wellness. And, how do you think about art in the context of the organizational work that you do? That's so interesting.
Yeah. Creativity is a critical part for any change. In order for us to create something different, we have to be able to imagine something outside of our current circumstances. Our ability to move from our current circumstances into something else is really dependent on the capacity we have to imagine. And that capacity to imagine can only be built by creative practices that invite us and encourage to think not just about what's immediately possible, but what seems like it might be impossible, and start to craft towards that. And when we build that muscle, then we can start to open up the possibilities that are available to us, and then think strategically about how are we going to choose one and move in a direction in a thoughtful way. And so absolutely artistic practice, creative practice, getting people to open up their minds about what the world could look like, what their organization could look like, what their own personal leadership practice could look like. That is necessary for folks to actually build their skill beyond just the kind of same litany of tools that they've already been using or have been shuffled around organizations for the last many decades.
I'm really having a reaction to the idea that change is a creative process, because in this moment of so much change and fear, to know that, creativity can serve us and that we do need massive transformations right now. It's like one of the things I love about being trans is this idea that we can change. And what you said about recognize what feels impossible and then look at ways to make that possible. It's really, really beautiful, Leigh.
Thank you. Yeah. There's so much, about this current moment that is actually about restriction of possibilities. We get into this particular oppositional moment that very much feels that folks are really entrenched in a belief that one group wins and one group loses, right? Whatever that group might be. And in order for me to win, somebody else has to lose because that's what I've been taught for so long. Or we have to do it this particular way, and that's the only way we've ever done it. And so we have to go back to that way without thinking maybe there's a way we can all win. Wouldn't that be the goal? And just because we haven't found it yet doesn't mean it's not possible. We have to be able to really expand our imagination to what would it be like if everybody was actually succeeding, if everyone was actually fed, if everyone was housed, if everyone felt good about who they were, if nobody had to result in violence or fear or intimidation or shame in order to get their needs met. But we all just actually got to feel good and get things done. Most of the time, people will just say it's not possible because they've never experienced it. And that's because our creativity shut down. Because when we were playing as little kids, we thought everything was possible. But as we got older, we forgot how to play. We forgot how to create and imagine. And so the ability to really cast a long line out into the horizon is what allows us to actually go in a direction that is really visionary and innovative and gets us out of the moment of this blame, shame, guilt, and, fight and destruction mode that we're in right now.
And that zero-sum game is like such binary thinking, which is so boring. Mm-hmm. And I know that we all get caught in this binary thinking just because it's so default in our society. But that's really, I think, what you're talking about. And even like AI and all of these things, I think, right now are making it harder to be imaginative and to really let ourselves imagine. And it feels like our imagination is even being under attack, and we know our empathy is being under attack. And I've heard you speak a bit about empathetic practice. And I'd
Yeah.
love to hear what do you mean by that?
When I talk about empathetic practice, I talk about the ability to really connect with all of humanity. So for me, empathy is beyond, if we get into like its core, like Latin meaning, empathy is to feel the same as somebody else, which straight up, I don't believe is possible. I don't think we can feel the same as somebody else because we're always bringing our own histories, our own experiences, our own identities into how we think like somebody else. And so, for a long time, I would talk about sympathy, feeling similar to. Now, sympathy isn't a word that we usually think of as a really great word in talking about the quest for real connection with people. It's often kind of like raise an eyebrow as if it is somehow insincere. And empathy right now is what a lot of folks are calling for. And so moving out of its Latin root to try to move it to how is it being used right now to try to feel for, right? To feel a connection with. And for me, the idea of empathy isn't about just feeling like another person, but actually about really understanding that person as if they are a part of self. That when we're connecting to all of humanity, we're connecting to all of our humanity and all of the ways that we can be human in this world, and therefore connecting to other people the same way that we are connecting to the things that we want and need as well, which actually takes healing the self first, right? Because it's really hard to heal and connect and to support somebody else if you're not able to really tend to those wounds that you carry as well. And then that the empathetic practice, when we're really trying to understand another person, it gives us tools, it gives us perspective to actually build strategy. And so while I love a kumbaya moment, I love feeling good about other people. I like that more than feeling angry and rageful, which I've spent much of my life feeling. My empathetic practice beyond that is actually about being strategic. What I've been seeing in my 20 plus years of movement strategy and organizational development work is that this moment that we are in is very much connected to, like you already talked about, binary thinking, right? Like this oppositional approach where folks believe that in order to advance like whatever my cause might be, and I'll put that in quotes, right? My cause, whatever my cause is, in order to advance it, I need to take down or fight against the other's cause. I need to, in order for me to win, somebody else has to lose. And that comes with, blaming other people for misgivings, punishing people, exiling people, sequestering people, ejecting people, from organizations. We'll fire them, we'll punish them, we'll sanction them, whatever that might be. And then because people are fearful of that, then they get resistant because they don't want to be punished or hurt or harmed. And so then there's this fight that happens, this opposition that's pretty strong. And that opposition has been built in then, if because I believe this, the other people believe this opposite thing, and they hate and I love, right? Like that's kind of like the rhetoric that we hear a lot. Most people who do things that I have deep distaste for don't believe that they're hateful people. That's just true. And having talked with a lot of folks, they don't believe that they're hating people. One example that I gave just last weekend when I was doing a workshop on radical empathy is I worked with queer young people for a very long time. And when some family members would punish their children for coming out, those family members didn't believe that they didn't hate their children, right? That they believed that they were doing this really hard thing that they had to do because they loved their children and they disagreed with their choice, right? Now, again, not anything I agree with at all. And also, if I just focused on the outcome and say that, oh, because the outcome is hurtful, you must hate your child, and then I engage that parent around the idea of how much they hate their child, that's not going to connect because they have no way of understanding that because that's not their motivation. They're going to think that I'm not that I don't understand, which is actually true. I'm performing that I don't understand. And so they're not going to listen to me either, even if I give suggestions of how they can do something better. If I connect to the love they have for their child and help them to understand how the way that they're performing love is harmful, then I'm actually connecting with empathy because I can understand that they love their child. And I can understand that this parent deserves love, happiness, safety, and security just as much as their child deserves love, happiness, safety, and security. If I can connect to both, like those, and just as much as I think that I deserve love, happiness, safety, security, then if we can connect on that piece, then we can actually strategically start to make decisions. What is the best way to support them in getting what they actually want to support their child? That doesn't have violent outcomes, that doesn't hurt, that doesn't harm. In organizational development work, similarly, when I'm working with organizations, to say if we're looking at this leader, this policy that we're trying to pass, whatever it is, as a thing that we're fighting against, rather than what are the things that we can actually, how can we support getting our needs met by really understanding what the other side, I put that again in quotes because I don't want to be binaryistic, but what this other, well, I believe to be an oppositional position or side wants and needs, and help them find a way to get it that doesn't invest in domination, destruction, and harm. But you have to, the only way you can do that is by practicing empathy. And it's a muscle that takes time to build. I've developed, workshop practice to structure out how you can build that muscle, and then how you can go from that empathetic understanding into strategic action that helps you get your needs met.
It's really beautiful to hear empathy and strategy paired together. I think that we don't associate those two words together, and you helping us practice empathy and learn how to make it strategic is really, really helpful and tangible. And it also makes me wonder, do you notice any differences in empathetic practice between working with someone on a personal issue versus a professional, an individual versus an organization? Is it always the same practice?
That's a great question. It's not always the same practice in that an individual has more movement and capacity to do something on their own, whereas an organization is made up of a lot of individuals, as well as institutionalized and codified policies, procedures, both which are formalized and also informalized, and a larger culture that you're trying to craft. It's possible. Within organizations, it looks different, but individuals are dealing with a lot of the traces of institutionalized policies and procedures within them, but at the same time are able to move with more deftly than an organization often can. I don't see it as significantly different on a personal versus a work level with individuals, however. That the things that I have seen folks holding that are challenges, barriers to actually building empathy, whether it be for somebody that they're trying to move or influence professionally, or people in their own lives that they're struggling to understand. The building the practice is fairly similar, and building that lens is fairly similar. And then the scars, actually, weirdly enough, are fairly similar as well. Because every single relationship we hold is going to be shaped by the relationships we've had previous. And so a lot of people's personal relationships, whether it be with somebody that they've known for a long time or someone fairly recently, are actually tracking back to the harms that they've experienced much, much longer ago, just as people in the professional world are going to react to other people based on relationships and interactions they've had, not just from that individual, but the things they've been holding for a very long time. And so all of those are coming into the conversation, just as they come in actually to every conversation we ever hold, whether or not we're conscious of it or not. My aim is to help people build that critical analysis that's necessary, and they really have to see much, much beyond the habits and the behavior and the traditional and familiarized behaviors, and start to see all of the pieces that make it up and then start to take it apart and then make decisions intentionally. That's when I talk about strategic. It's like I want folks to make intentional decisions, not just passive decisions and think that other things aren't possible, not that the tools are just laid around our feet, which are usually tools of domination and destruction, but instead find the tools that, again, we haven't found yet because we're looking at the world a different way. And so the empathetic practice is a piece of just looking at the world a different way and then making choices that are intentional that hopefully are getting us closer to the outcomes that we desire.
Yeah, incredibly powerful. And it also just makes me think of equity. And I'm hearing you talk about empathy, and we certainly can see a huge lack of empathy in terms of equity and liberation in this moment, right? These words are being attacked and vilified. And so how does equity fit in with empathetic presence?
Yeah. Equity is a word that I have connected with and has it centralized in my practice for a very long time. And as a person who's been doing work that's kind of like in the realm of justice and liberation for 25 years, that the equity is about people getting what they need. And those things are different. And particularly in relationship to not just what they need in this particular moment, but things that they need in response to the ways in which harms have traditionally, historically, and presently, how those have actually impacted folks. One example I used to give all the time in workshops was if we're having a pizza party at work and we have pizzas for everybody, and there's enough for everybody to have one slice of pizza. It's kind of a stingy pizza party, to be honest, but here we are. Everyone has one slice of pizza. But the equality model is every single person gets one piece of pizza. So Leigh, you get one piece of pizza. I get one piece of pizza. Fred gets one piece of pizza. And Fred's family owns a pizza company. They have pizza everywhere. They actually already had pizza for lunch. They're not really hungry for pizza. Their fridge is filled with pizza at home. But Fred still gets a piece. And that doesn't necessarily seem fair, but it's fair if you talk about equality. It's not fair in terms of equity. Meanwhile, Leigh, maybe you haven't eaten that day and you're really hungry. Maybe your fridge is pretty empty. Maybe you haven't eaten in a couple of days, but you still just get one piece, right? So that the equality model is every single one of us gets one piece regardless. And the equity is to name that maybe Fred's like, you know what, I'm not hungry. Leigh, have my piece. Boom, that's equity right there. Leigh needs an extra slice right now. Leigh's a little extra hungry. Leigh gets an extra piece. When we're talking about equity at this moment, it's getting all wrapped up in this on a political moment, and the word itself actually doesn't really matter. That practice matters.
Yeah, definitely.
Of like, how are we actually showing up to say like, hey, you need a little extra boost right now? I don't need it. I actually don't need it. Here you go. Now we've been in the United States. We've been raised on this concept of fairness, and fairness is. We've been taught is this equality model that everyone still gets a piece. Well, that's not fair. Why does Leigh get an extra piece? I don't get an extra piece. Yeah, that may not seem fair on the very, very surface. And if we're just looking at how things play out at that pizza party and everybody walks into that room and Fred has no pizza on their plate and you have two pieces, Fred might say that's not fair. Because often our approach to equity hasn't ever been around getting people to buy in to what they need and what they're giving up willingly. And we often haven't been, we're talking about large societies, we're well beyond a pizza party when we're talking about, the United States, much less the global community. But how we build a larger culture to actually show up for our needs are different, and that's okay. And we don't need to just have all the pizza. The way that when we're building an empathetic practice, it actually helps us really care for what the other people need. And there's a reason why it's under attack. It's because it is very effective to invite people to share rather than own. And when we invest in people sharing rather than owning, that's a dig on not a dig on. That is something that challenges the core of capitalism itself. Capitalism isn't about money on its core. It's about ownership. It's about restricting. It's about being able to hold something rather than something being the will or the collective of the people. And what I know is that people may feel some sort of success by owning more, but I almost always see, and I mean, I work with some real rich people, to be real at times, not exclusively, right? But I've worked with some real rich people, that people are happier when they share.
Yeah.
And so if people are happier when they share, and can we build cultures and communities and organizations and relationships where we're actually just like, yeah, we're good. We don't need to balance things out. They don't need to be balanced. We just need to make sure that we're actually feeling good about how we're showing up, how I'm showing up, and what we all have. And making sure that at the very, very least, that everyone is able to be healthy, happy, safe, and secure. And when we have those things, then everything beyond that is gravy.
Yeah, it's almost impossible when it's a zero-sum game, which is why capitalism is designed that way. But my question for you, this is fascinating, by the way. I love the way that you think about this work. I think it's so important right now. But can you have equity without empathy then?
We can have we can have similar results without empathy, but I don't think we're ever going to actually get to it. No. Because folks getting what they need, that on like, if we look at that as like an exchange of things, right? If we go back into that like accounting, yeah, folks can get what they need to some extent, but actually buying in and actually investing on what do people need versus what do they want, what feels like fair or unfair, that requires empathy to be able to actually even do that work. And so it is a foundational practice in order for us to get to the place of equity, which gets us to the place of liberation, right? Liberation is a place where we all get to be fully human, and we do not have to, where value is not contingent on any characteristic, but we actually get to just live, not, people said the word free before, and I'm very cautious not to say free. But people get to live fully human lives, which means we have access to things that are available to us while still being responsive and caring to the others around us. And if we're not in relationship with other human beings in a way that is right and just and caring, then we're not actually fully human. There's a reason why we're a social species, is because we want to be in connection. And so if we're creating dividing lines between us and other people, then we're not fully human either. So liberation is a place where we're fully human, where we have full connections with other people. We have to be able to understand self and other in relationship with each other, as opposed to that dividing line of binary, us versus them, me versus you, self and other. But instead, we're all part of this together. That requires empathy to make it happen.
Liberation is a place where we are fully human. Yes. And, I have so much hope for the organizing that's happening all over this country, for people using their voices. And yet, you mentioned movement strategy and thinking about liberatory spaces and social impact spaces and how much conflict there is in so many of these spaces, let alone, really any space. But how do we build movements that are equitable, that are liberatory, and how do we hold each other accountable when we have internal disagreement?
It's not easy, because I'll be cautious not to say all, the vast majority of us have been steeped in a culture that says criticism is dangerous, because criticism leads to punishment, exile, destruction, etc. Because that's what has happened to us, and we've seen that happen to other people. And so, to be in a place where folks can actually have organizations have cultures of curiosity, and are able to provide critical and loving feedback to each other, that doesn't feel threatening. It takes a while to develop. And across organizations, we're dealing with different cultures, right? Because each organization has its own unique culture. It's both in its field, but also like where they're at in the world, and also what their workplace culture is, who's actually making it up, the body of the organization, the constituency, etc. But across these organizations, folks don't agree on what we're supposed to be doing. And often those disagreements go into the finger wagging, blame shaming, guilt pieces. First off, I believe that, we have to move beyond like what in our movements, there's not going to be a one right way. There just isn't. We have to take that off the shelf and instead say there's a lot of ways to move forward. What am I uniquely positioned to do, and what's the strategic opportunity available? And this is what, I walk all of my clients through this question. What are you uniquely positioned to do? Is what are your skills? What are your talents? What are your capacities? What are your positionalities and relationships that you are holding that feel important? Those things, all of the things. What do you have the energy to do, or the resources to do? That's your unique positionality. And then there's a strategic opportunity within those fields, within those things that you're holding, that perhaps you can engage in at that moment. And that's going to be different based on what your unique positionality is and what's available to you, where you are, what the moment is. So each group may be actually having to do different things, and understand that there isn't just one right way. So one of the things that I often get, one of my roles often is in spaces that often are a little bit more incremental. Asking organizations to shift, asking for policy changes, helping do training and culture shifts. And some of those things are smaller practices, even though there are violences that are happening right now that are causing death and destruction for communities globally, but definitely right here, and not only in the world, but in my own hometown, right? And so, like, incrementalism isn't going to meet the needs of the person who's under fire right today.
Yeah.
And there are people who are trying to stop the people who are under fire right now today, and they need something fast.
Yeah.
And fast movements usually don't get buy-in, except for in some situations, in some circumstances. We can talk about that another time. But most of the time, fast, stop this right now, that is literally an oppositional stance. And so that's not going to develop buy-in, but it may stop the behavior, but it may not stop the culture where the behavior isn't going to replicate down the road. And so with that, we have to acknowledge that both of those strategies actually need to happen. Like, I need somebody to be there to say, stop this violence right now. And I need the cultures of people who are told to stop this right now are also learning how to build the practice so that way they never go back and put somebody under fire again. Stopping that one time isn't going to help the next time unless we are building those practices. So we need to be empathetic about the any and all fronts. This work needs to happen. I will tell my client, or I'll tell people often that, like, I actually really benefit from having people outside the building saying, with I say this to be silly, but with pitchforks and torches saying, because when people are outside with pitchforks and torches, and I'm like, hey, don't you think it'd be nice to get out of here? Because I think they might burn the building down. We should go, and get the buy-in about leaving and vacating before anything happens. But having folks put fire under the cause can help the rest of us who are doing that incremental work actually have the energy and the opportunity to coax people to change. Because change isn't easy. Folks rarely embrace it or enjoy it, and so because of that, we need a lot of motivation to go through change. And that motivation, if it's just like fear of litigation or some sort of like political impetus, it's not the greatest. But if it can be because folks actually are building the tools to care, building the practice to understand why the change is helpful, and then building the skills, the muscle to just understand that change is constant, so let's just start to feel it and know it, then they can move a little bit more swiftly in it. And then just last to say on that when we talk about organizations kind of in these infighting moments, that we really have to think about what are the things that we have in alignment, and can we just really support each other on that? And that's part of that empathetic practice, again, is even if it's hard to see, what are the places of alignment, and then can we support in building the conditions where we get that. Foundational work hasn't happened a long time around equity and justice work. Folks have been doing top level, and when DEI, put that in quotes, became an industry, elements of the work has happened for decades and decades and decades, right? Like my work before DEI were letters. But when DEI became an industry, much of it was in, this is how you don't get sued, this is how you don't get this is how HR policies that you create, et cetera, but not about like, how do you support the culture of your staff to think differently about each other and about themselves? How do you get them to not feel in competition with each other where they have to, feel like they're fighting all the time? How do you actually build a community of care where that even if someone is let go, they're not going to want to sue you because they straight up know that you're trying your best and they care about you too, right? Those are radically transformative spaces to work. I've worked in such a space in the past and I've helped create them since. But folks don't think it's possible. And so they just stay in these places of competition. So when we build those foundational understanding, empathy being one of those practices, then folks can have the tools that they need to develop policies and procedures and practices that actually are rooted in these more liberatory approaches.
I can see why it's so important to have someone who's external to the organization, and you being an external facilitator and consultant. I can see how important that is just for helping people even get to that place. And, it really comes full circle of thinking about like change as a creative process, and there is no one size fits all. And even that gives me hope and clarity. And I'm really grateful, Leigh, that you have a practice around this, that you have a process to lead us through and organizations through, because boy, do we need it right now.
Yeah, and we need it. I would say we've always needed it. We need it all the time. And right now we're seeing why it's been needed. We're seeing the worst part of it. And even when things seem to be a little bit more copacetic, we still need to be doing it. Until we reach liberation where everyone just kind of gets everything that we need and want all at the same time, like we should always be going towards how do we become better. So when this part of the work is done, there will always be more to do. Change is that constant piece. We're just going to keep growing, keep building. And the only time that you know that you have failed is when you're not moving in the direction of that liberatory vision. So yeah, we always need it at all times. Right now, we're in a really hard spot. We're feeling a lot of pain points. There's a lot of hurt and harm in the world. And I'm also saying that a lot of the people who are the progenitors of the destruction that we are experiencing right now also have experienced a lot of hurt and harm in the world. They are results of trauma and generational trauma that has taught them that the only way to be a human being is to cut themselves off from other human beings and to hurt other people. And that's a really sad existence to live as well. We all need it. This is an opportunity for us to kind of continue to try to get it, not through fighting at each other, but actually bringing each other in.
We all need it, and I'm really grateful for you to be able to see that and to help us see it. And I'm so grateful for this conversation and to be your friend and to learn from you. Thank you, Leigh.
Same. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciated it, Leigh, and for everything that you continue to do to lift up what makes people the best of who they are and to feel better about how they share their voice and how they show up in the world.
Thank you, my friend.